Right, so here on Trace Velo, I try and build some really great value bikes, mainly using cheaper parts sourced directly from China. AliExpress can be an absolute goldmine for these type of cheap bike parts, but when you're constantly chasing the lowest possible price, like I often am, you have to accept some trade-offs. For example, this carbon seat post from Data, a really respectable brand, 188 quid. This one from AliExpress looks kind of similar, made of carbon, similar sort of weight savings, 25 quid. That's 13% of the price. Yeah, just crazy. As it happens, a viewer of mine bought that cheap seat post and it snapped on his very first use, and it left a massive gash in his leg as well. Not good. But there's this notion that it kind of all comes from the same place anyway. You're just not paying for the branding, so it's cheaper. Very occasionally, there's a shred of truth to that, but most of the time, not true. At the bare minimum, you're gonna be accepting a much lower level of quality control and therefore a higher degree of risk. So why exactly did that cheap seat post just sort of snap in half? How can you stay safe buying stuff like that on places like AliExpress? And why has exactly the same seat post that I bought been totally fine? Yeah, should be a good one. My name, as always, is Luke, and welcome back to Trace Velo. So buying cheap bike parts, it's a gamble, right? You hear this all the time, and yeah, in this case, it's true. So this is the cheap seat post in question. It's from a brand that I'm quite familiar with, actually, Toseek or Toseek. They make a lot of really cheap carbon bike parts. Think saddles, bottle cages, stems, handlebars, seat posts. Now, I've actually used a number of things from them in the past with no issues, it has to be said, but that's not the case with this viewer, Nick. He fitted it to his Cube gravel bike, got on the turbo trainer. Less than an hour into its first use, he sat up to get a drink. The seat post just collapsed underneath him. He went flying backwards, hit a desk, and sliced up his leg. Yeah, not good. Carbon seat posts commonly fail at the clamping point. So you stick it on the bike, over tighten that clamping band, it compromises the carbon, and that's where it fails. Not the case here. It sort of snapped midway up the seat post. Ultimately, it wasn't compromised by Nick. This wasn't user error. It's worth pointing out as well, because it's a valid point, and this is going out on the internet, so people are gonna ask. He's not a heavy rider, 82 kilos, so well below the supposed 120 kilogram weight limit this thing claims on AliExpress. But here's the thing, after chatting with Nick, I went ahead and bought exactly the same seat post from exactly the same seller on AliExpress. So 24 quid later, here it is. It came in this pretty beaten up cardboard box, so off to a flying start already, but yeah, inside it did look totally fine, not a scratch on it actually. I even had a quick look inside with my endoscope, and from what I could see, yeah, everything was pretty much as it should be. Wall thicknesses were consistent, no major wrinkles or voids that I could make out. Yeah, it all seemed okay. I'm putting it on my steel road bike here, replacing the original aluminium seat post that came supplied with the frame. You can see that one comes in at 326 grams, whereas this new cheap carbon one is 162. So yeah, less than half the weight. So I got it slapped on. I reversed the seat post clamp as well, which I believe is kind of recommended best practice for carbon seat posts, and yeah, hit the road. Now, I obviously took it very easy for the first few kilometers, but there were no creaks, groans, cracks, funny noises. For reference, I weigh 74, 75 kilos, and after a little while, my confidence was building, so I went hands-free, kind of put my weight on the back of the saddle. Yeah, still fine. Long story short, 120 kilometers later, maybe a little bit more, it's still rock solid. Plus, the roads around me aren't perfect either. English B roads are quite choppy, the tarmac's broken up, and I've even hit a few potholes on purpose with all my weight on the back of the saddle. Yeah, still absolutely nothing. So this is a perfect example of that gamble. It's paid off for me, it didn't for Nick. And in fact, I covered a set of Toseek handlebars in the past with an almost identical story. So my set were fine and still are to this day, I think 5 years later, something like that. But my friend bought a set and they snapped pretty much on the first ride. So yeah, it looks to me as if Toseek have a little bit of a problem with consistency in their products. So if you ask me, they're probably one to stay clear of. Now, the first thing that crossed my mind, and I'm sure many of yours as well, is that they just didn't put enough carbon in that area, right? But if you have a look here, he's pulled the brake apart afterwards to have a quick look. And there are a lot of layers up there, or it certainly seems that way to me anyway. But two things caught my eye. So firstly, those larger strands of carbon in the middle there, they're sort of largely intact. Now, that could just be the way the brake sort of propagated through the material, but it does also raise questions about how well all of the layers were bonded together, considering they've peeled off or delaminated so cleanly. Secondly, the layers of carbon don't seem particularly well sort of combined. Now, admittedly, this area has undergone some violent structural failure, so some degree of ply separation is to be expected. But even taking that into account, the layers at the top here, they don't seem very well consolidated. They're not very dense, if you see what I mean. Now, I've actually spent a bit of time inside the factories in China that make these type of products, and while I'm no expert by any stretch, I do have a few theories. So to make a hollow carbon part, you need heat, but you also need pressure. So layers of prepreg or carbon pre-impregnated with resin are wrapped around an air bladder, and that's encased inside a mold to bake. The heat helps the resin flow and then cure, but the air bladder itself is inflated to compress all of those layers of carbon together, removing any voids and creating a dense, well-consolidated laminate. So if that air bladder leaked, or maybe it ruptured during the cure, all those layers won't have been squeezed together properly, and that's going to create a weaker part. Now, to be clear, I cannot prove that this is what happened, but it is a possibility. So I was at a factory a few weeks back, and they had a water bath. So what they do is they take parts straight out of the mold, submerge them in water, and then inflate the air bladders with compressed air to check for bubbles, because if that bladder had leaked, that part was scrapped. Hypothetically, if a manufacturer was trying to, reduce time and therefore cut costs, maybe this step would be shortened or skipped entirely. Obviously, I've got no idea, but it does go to show that a carbon part can look fine from the outside, but kind of hide structural defects within. It could also be the prepreg itself. So I learned that those big sheets of prepreg have to be stored in a freezer before use, because the resin is heat activated. So once they're removed for use, yeah, the clock is ticking. So if the sheets aren't tracked properly around the factory, maybe a couple of them got left out a few days too long, that resin will have deteriorated. So if it was then used in the layup, it won't have flowed and bonded the layers properly together within the mold. That's a possibility as well. It could also just be the layup. I mean, it's all done by hand, so if that worker was under a bit of a time crunch, mistakes can happen. Again, I've got no idea if any of this led to the failure. Let me know what you reckon in the comments. But I just wanted to kind of demonstrate the fact that carbon composite production is a very complicated process, and there are a lot of manufacturing steps and variables that aren't really visible from the outside. And that's one of the reasons these really cheap carbon parts can be such a gamble. All right, let me grab you for less than 30 seconds. So if you like cycling, you might want some clothes to go with it. I've worn Siroko gear on, no joke, every single ride for well over 5 years at this point. It's great value, looks nice, and lasts ages as well. I genuinely still wear the stuff I got 5 years ago. They do everything from socks, jackets, gilets, jerseys, bib shorts, cycle glasses, cycle caps. So yeah, if you want to check them out, you can use my link in the description or scan this QR code. It'll get you 10% off everything they do. And yeah, anything you buy helps me out a little bit as well, which is good. Anyway, thanks for listening. Back to it. Now, if you're planning to use any of these very cheap bike parts, I'm not gonna sit here and tell you not to, because it's hypocritical. I do it all the time, right? I strongly suggest there's a certain mindset you need to adopt. Let's go back to that Dada carbon seat post. It's the perfect example. So I'd expect to slap that on the bike and abuse it from day one with the expectation it will be completely fine. It's a quality part, you've paid good money for it. It's kind of the bare minimum. You cannot do that with these ultra cheap bike parts. I mean, you can, but you're just gonna be asking for trouble. Many of them will come with like a QC or quality control sticker on them. My advice, assume QC is minimal or potentially non-existent, right? So you have to do that QC yourself. In the case of this seat post, flex it off the bike, fit it up, put some pressure on the saddle. Then as you ride it, slowly put your weight on it. Once confidence builds, know, go hands-free, put some weight on the back of the saddle, hit some potholes. Basically, if you initially use it as if you're assuming something is gonna break, you won't be caught off guard in the event that something does happen. I do this with most of the budget stuff I buy off AliExpress, especially the really cheap stuff. I generally won't trust my life to something until I've abused it in this way with zero issues for at least 100, 150 kilometers. Now, that obviously doesn't guarantee a part is completely safe. It can still fail later in its life like anything. But in my experience, those major manufacturing defects, they're gonna show up relatively early. So just be, you know, very vigilant for the first couple of rides. Plus, after a while, you do start to develop a kind of sixth sense, a spidey sense for this sort of stuff. So you'll get on the bike, you'll hear a new click, something just doesn't feel right. So get off the bike and inspect it. And that, in a nutshell, is the trade-off. Yes, these parts are a lot cheaper, and in many cases they can perform just as well as their more expensive cousins, but there is a much higher degree of uncertainty around QC, build quality, stuff like that, so treat them accordingly. And if you can't be bothered with that, I 100% understand. It is a lot of faff, in which case, pay the price and stick with name brand stuff. Be extra careful with contact points on the bike. So we're talking handlebars, pedals, saddles, seat posts, stuff like that, because I feel like those are the parts that are bought most often on AliExpress because there are so many cheap options on there. But in many ways, they're the kind of most dangerous. I mean, imagine going down a descent, holding onto the drops, hit a pothole, and maybe one of them snaps off. Also, if a part is cheap and also very lightweight as well, yeah, be cautious. For example, this pedal here, it's cheap, but the body is aluminium and the axle is steel. Chances are it's pretty robust. Conversely, this set of pedals, the body is a carbon composite and the axle is a titanium alloy. It might be fine, but I suspect the safety margin is probably a little bit lower. In fact, I bought this set of lightweight pedals the other day. I think maybe they're being delivered tomorrow. So yeah, stay tuned for that. Same with saddles. So this one has a plastic base and steel rails. This one is a stripped down super lightweight carbon one. They're both on paper rated to 120 kilograms, but instinctively, which one do you trust more? But it's obviously a sliding scale as well. There is some legitimately well-made stuff on AliExpress. I've certainly showed that over the years, but it's this ultra cheap stuff that deserves some real scrutiny. I'm talking a carbon saddle for 40 quid or a set of integrated carbon handlebars for like 50 pounds, stuff that's a fraction of the price of other stuff on the market. For example, this integrated carbon handlebar from Velo, I actually bought one the other day and it was, yeah, decent, quite heavy, but did seem robust. However, it is very cheap. Most integrated carbon handlebars cost at least $300. So by all means, buy one of these, but just test it. Be careful. It's another one that's potentially a bit of a gamble. At the end of the day, be sensible. These ultra cheap bike parts can be absolutely fantastic, but assume nothing, inspect everything, and trust only what you have personally validated yourself, not what you've read on the product page. Now, the reality is I've personally experienced very few kind of major issues, even with the like cheapest stuff I've bought from AliExpress, but it absolutely does happen. I've shown that a number of times, not just this case. So you do need to be vigilant, and if you are shopping on AliExpress, do keep that mindset, because even if I say something is good, the part you get, it might be a dud, so you need to check it. Now, I don't want to come across as preachy. Hopefully that's not the case, but I do just want people to be safe and set expectations for products like this on AliExpress. So yeah, hopefully you found that useful, and yeah, like and subscribe, all that good stuff. Right, I'm gonna go out for a bike ride on one of my super cheap bikes that I built, and chances are I'm gonna be absolutely fine, but you never know. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Ciao, ciao.
It's the bonus clip time.
All right, so firstly, I am aware of the fact that the saddle on this bike is quite far forward. You can see I've got it pushed nearly all the way forward. Ideally, I'd have it much more in the middle, but for one, the setback on this new seat post is a bit further back, so I've had to kind of push it forward. And if I'm honest with myself, the stem length on this set of integrated bars is a bit too long. The stem length on this is 120 mil. I've got a 100 mil one coming in the post. So when that gets here, I'll slap that on and I can make sure the saddle setback is back to normal. Secondly, you may remember this bike here. I built it a couple weeks ago. It's this light carbon all-road build, but I've changed something on it. So these are the tires I originally had on the bike. They're the Bontrager Girona RSL tires, and wow, they were good, but they were 60 quid a piece. It's That's 120 quid. Plus, they're not, well, they're quite slick in the center for faster rolling resistance on the tarmac, but the outer tread isn't that aggressive, and I found they weren't fantastic on looser gravel. So I was scouring AliExpress for a more cost-efficient kind of equivalent, and I found these. So these are the CST Traveler tires in 700 by 38. So CST, I believe, is a sister company to Maxxis that are quite famous for making mountain bike tires. This is their Traveler Cross tire. So it's got quite a slick middle tread here for faster rolling on tarmac, but the outer tread here is much more aggressive and knobbly than it was on the Bontrager's. And they're 18 quid each rather than 60 for those Bontrager's. Now, they're not the fastest thing in the world. I used them yesterday and I was up against some people with kind of skinnier road standard tires like this, and it was a little bit of an effort to keep up with them, but they are nice and grippy and they're much, much cheaper. So yeah, I'm testing those out, and I've got some kind of more road equivalent tires in the post to try as well, because I'm aware loads of you have been asking me for some more cost-effective tire options, because yeah, 60 quid each. I mean, that's the going rate, but if you look at GP5000s, I think they're like 90 quid a piece in some places, which is crazy. So yeah, stay tuned for that. Hopefully some decent tires to show you coming up soon. Also, I've got these lightweight pedals here, 2 sets actually to test. I've also got to show you this lightweight carbon saddle. This thing is 60 grams, which is nuts. And I've got an even lighter one in the post as well. So basically, yeah, loads on. Get subscribed, and yeah, see you next time.